Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to this presentation by Dr. Amir Kalan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Integrated Studies in Education at McGill University. We are very happy to welcome you this afternoon, but before we start, we are going to play the land acknowledgement video.
So welcome everybody. Thank you everyone for joining us for this edition of our speaker series. I would like to introduce and welcome Dr. Amir Kalan, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Integrated Studies in Education at McGill University, right here at McGill. And in his work, he attempts to create a sociology of writing that can help educators and researchers better understand socio-cultural, political, and power relational aspects of writing. He is particularly interested in learning about the experiences of minoritized and racialized students in multicultural and multilingual contexts. And I've taken a class with Dr. Kalan, and it was definitely one of the highlights of the classes that I've been able to take at DICE. And it really opened up, for me, a lot of different ways of thinking about literacy and writing in particular, and the ways that we measure the legitimacy of different types of writing. And that was a wonderful class that I took with Dr. Kalan, and so I'm really glad that he was able to join us for the speaker series, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you. At the end, we'll have questions and answers coming at the end of the talk. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat, or well, yeah, you have to type them into the chat. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Dr. Kalan, for being here. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Brian, for your introduction. I think it was my pleasure to actually run that course and to be in conversation with the students like you, and to learn about all the diverse kind of practices that teachers are creatively on a daily basis engaging with. And I was appreciative of having the chance to bring those practices and discourses together in that course. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I would also like to thank the School of Continuing Studies for just creating this possibility for me to be in conversation with instructors in the center, and the other members of the audience. I started actually my own career as a teacher in ESL for adult learners, and it's wonderful to reconnect with the same community. So today I'm going to talk about kind of alternative approaches or alternative perceptions of peer feedback and collaboration in the process of writing. alternative approaches that might actually tend towards perceptions of peer feedback as building intellectual communities. As you see in the title, I've had the subtitle, a contribution to the Chat GPT debate. So, because while I was working on my presentation and just trying to reframe it for our purposes, we were engaged with a debate about chatbots and their impact on the process of teaching and learning writing. And I felt this is a really wonderful opportunity for me to add that edge to actually illustrate more effectively the significance of this research. As you're going to see, I'm going to advocate for moving kind of beyond traditional forms of peer feedback to creating writing communities that get together to create an impact on society. Sometimes I find it might be a little bit difficult to sell this argument to educational kind of settings and different communities of teachers. But I think with the kind of with the rise of chatbots as an everyday reality, I find it's a little bit easier for me to talk about that topic. So this is the previous title for the presentation: Fostering Intellectual Alliances Through Collaborative Writing, Moving Beyond Traditional Perceptions of Peer Feedback. So in this presentation, I'm still gonna focus actually on a question about peer feedback, but I'm gonna connect it with our concerns and our anxieties about AI technology in general and chatbots that can produce writing which resembles a student writing in different ways. So as you must have actually again probably heard about this or have been part of that conversation, there has been a debate recently about the impact of chatbots. So people have been talking about the end of high school English or a kind of existential threat to the future of colleges, say. In an alternative trend, people have been trying to find ways to incorporate chatbots in the process of teaching and learning writing. So people, for instance, have decided that now that everybody's cheating, let's just allow the students to use ChatGPT and other chatbots. So on the one hand, people have been really worried about kind of the end of a particular period, a pedagogical period. On the other hand, people, as usual, have been trying to incorporate technology into everyday practices. I would like to offer kind of another voice in this conversation, and I may not be really the only one. I'm sure other people have written about this as well. But I'm going to offer that the kind of the argument that chatbots are actually the Frankenstein's monster of dominant writing education. So what has happened over actually a couple of centuries? We have developed different forms of pedagogical practice that have been intended to turn our students into machines. So what has happened now is, lo and behold, somebody has invented the actual machine, and the machine is giving us what we have been trying to teach the students for a long time. So in a sense, these chatbots are the monster that we have created, and the monster has come to life now. So I make that claim because we knew from we have known this for a long time that our pedagogy, our writing pedagogy, has been actually a pedagogy of teaching students a rhetoric of the production, in Tim Burt's words. So in this rhetoric of the production, what we have done is we have removed traces of human subjectivity and positionality in the process of writing. I just refer you to the kind of old-fashioned debate about using I, the first person, in an essay or not using it. So the question is really how much of our humanity and positionality and subjectivity are we allowed to show in the process of writing? We have completely disregarded the organic human networks within which texts are produced for meaningful cultural, social, and political goals. Our students usually write individually, and they usually write it for an audience of one, which is the teacher. Actually, we know that a lot of writing historically hasn't been like this. People have got together in different communities, intellectual, academic, artistic, literary communities, and they have written for particular agendas and goals. And we have disregarded that completely in our pedagogies. In our pedagogies also, we have prioritized reporting over expression, exploration, and experimentation. So we are always reporting in our kind of dominant forms of writing, and we try to be factual. So we are reporting facts all the time. Part and parcel of that practice has been imposing genre restrictions and narrowing down a lot of genre possibilities to kind of an essayist genre approach that really gives a particular status in our educational settings to the essay as a dominant form. And of course, all of that has been evaluated kind of rigorously through a formalist lens. So we paid a lot of attention to errorless texts and how we can polish texts. So in a way, we have engaged in a rhetoric of the production. What we are teaching dominantly to students is how they can hide the process of writing, how they can produce a polished and finalized product that removes any trace of human error or human connection or human expression. So I'm gonna start talking a little bit about my own research, but at the end, I'm coming back to what chatbots can do better than our students, and probably, as predicted, in a kind of in a few years, better than any writing teacher. And I'll come back to this rhetoric of the production at the end of the presentation to talk about the significance of the research that I'm going to talk about today. So in my research, I generally work with two different perceptions of literacy. I believe that there is always a conflict between institutional literacies and organic literacies. So institutional literacies, I believe that are really less about literacy and literacy learning and teaching, and more about discourse control. So a lot of institutional literacies that we engage with have been designed to regulate discourses and to regulate how knowledge is distributed in educational settings. And I think the more significant role is in society. Whereas organic literacies are literacies that people on an everyday kind of basis engage with as a kind for instance, as to write as a form of social communication and social action. In one of the research projects that I did actually a couple of years ago, I conducted an ethnographic study of literate lives of 3 multilingual writers. I was interested to know how these writers, who were successful writers in English as an additional language, how they engaged with writing in their organic contexts that enabled them to write successfully in English. So I worked with three women, Choma, Clarice, and Magda, and these are all pseudonyms. Sherman, Clarice, and Magda were newcomers to Canada. I conducted this research in Toronto. They had just arrived in Canada, I think, in kind of, we're talking about a time frame like 1 to 3 years, but they were already embraced by literary, academic, and professional communities. And I wanted to know what they did, what the organic contexts that enabled them to write in English successfully. Choman was a Kurdish novelist. She spoke Kurdish, Persian, and English, and she was learning French as well. So she had never published a novel before she got to Canada, but I think only 1 year after arrival, Truman published a novel in Canada. Clarice was an academic writer. She was a graduate student at a university in Toronto. And she, again, very successfully engaged with producing kind of academic texts, and she had multiple publications. Magda did a lot of professional and technical writing. She was a Hungarian woman who spoke multiple European languages, and she wrote textbooks both in English and in other European languages she knew. So I just recruited these people, and I found them around me, and I was just asking them, what did you do? What are some of the organic contexts that helped them develop your writing skills and publish and be appreciated by professional, academic, and artistic communities and literary communities in Canada? So the two research questions I had were, what are the major organic literacy practices that help multilingual writers successfully engage in writing in English as an additional language? And what are the social, cultural, and discursive contexts that have shaped the participants' experiences with writing? So I've provided a full kind of report of the findings of this research in this book, Sociocultural and Power Relational Dimensions of Multilingual Writing, Recommendations for the Industrializing Writing Education. And if you notice, I think the industrialization kind of connects very well with our conversations about chatbots, because they use kind of language models that follow certain kind of rhetorically industrial guidelines to produce text. So today, however, I'm going to focus on just sections of kind of findings of that research project, and I'm going to focus on collaboration in writing and the humans involved in the process of text production. And there is a good reason to focus on that if we look at the kind of the timeline of the development of writing composition as a field. So this is a very simplified timeline of how the field of writing composition has evolved over time. So initially, our focus was on the text. So we were very much interested in the rhetorical practices that writers engaged in. Later on, there was more attention with the dominance of psychological paradigms in educational research. We became interested in cognition, and we became interested in what happened in the brains of people when they wrote or when they were learning to write. A more kind of recent development has been attention to the social context of writing. So a focus on, as you see, we have never really forgotten about the importance of text or cognition, but we have added this very important layer, which is the social context. Part and parcel of viewing writing as a social phenomenon is really just thinking about peer feedback and the people who are involved in the process of producing text. So collaboration in writing is really a very, very important question when it comes to that final layer. People have written about collaboration in writing in different ways. For instance, people have written a lot about process approaches to teaching writing and collaboration along this kind of process, from brainstorming to co-writing to peer assessment. People have also written a lot about online collaborative practices, for instance, wiki writing, in which different people can get together and co-author a text at the same time, or just together, but not necessarily at the same time. So wiki writing has been a very interesting phenomenon for researchers to study. People have also written about collaborative writing and participatory research. So how researchers with the participants get together and produce text. Also, I think we could look at other trends in writing research, like, for instance, writing center research as really kind of trying to make sense of different forms of collaboration in the process of writing as well. So what I'm talking about really is a kind of addition to all these conversations, what it means to think about collaboration in the process of writing. So the outcome of a lot of these conversations is really kind of two forms of finding. One is teachers and generally, I mean, writers, but teachers can use that as a kind of pedagogical tool. So writers in the process of writing seek the kind of the support of the peers. So pedagogically, based on the research that I spoke about and the different trends that I listed, pedagogically, collaboration in writing can be viewed as a pedagogical tool to invite students to physically write together, to edit each other's work, to provide peer feedback, and to co-author text. On the other hand, collaboration in writing can be viewed as forming writing communities, often motivated by certain social, cultural, and political agendas. So these are a little bit different because if you look at the kind of the first formulation or the first conceptualization of collaboration in writing, we are looking at in the classroom, and students get together to find errors in each other's work. So it's more of a kind of physical collaboration in the process of writing, particularly in the classroom as an educational setting. But the next, the other kind of conceptualization views writing classes as possibilities for forming writing communities, and these communities don't get together to polish kind of the members' writing, or to invite members to edit one another's writing. What matters in this form, kind of in this conceptualization, is really the kind of the social, cultural, and political agendas that these people have. I talked to the three participants that I introduced to you about these two kind of conceptualizations of collaboration. And they gave me practically no feedback, or they shared no memories about the significance of having a peer edit the work in the classroom. What really mattered to them most was their engagement with different communities that they were interested in, because they shared the same sociocultural and political agendas. So when we talk about writing as a social phenomenon, we really might mean different things. So we might view writing as happening in the context of social constructivism, which really goes back to Vygotsky's ideas about what it means to do education in a social context. So for Vygotsky, I think what really mattered was the process of peers helping one another and teachers just facilitating that process within the classroom. Another form of looking at writing as a social phenomenon is really a kind of focus on genre. It's looking at genres, different written genres, as socially accepted by different communities. So a genre approach is another manifestation of the idea of writing as a social phenomenon. The next kind of form of looking at writing as a social phenomenon is looking at writing as social action. That means what writing can do and how different communities use writing to impact society in different ways. So in my research, what I saw really was the participants uh, uh, talked about writing as social action more than anything else. So they gave me really zero data about their engagements with peers or teachers in the classroom to create text. The focus was really on what writing can do for society and how that motivated them to engage with different writing communities to write for societal impact. So there were particular kind of themes that came out of our conversations in that regard. So all these three women believe that an agenda-based writing collaboration was a very important component of different forms of collaborations that they had in writing. So Magda was the Hungarian woman who engaged with professional writing and textual writing. Magda, for instance, spoke about a particular project, a European Learning Resources project. So Magda was an older participant, so she became a technical writer and a textbook producer in Europe when the idea of EU was becoming a reality. So the Europeans had got together and they had stirred up interest in different academic and educational communities to engage in the European Learning Resources project. So for Magda, that project and involvement in that project was actually the main motivation for her to start writing in English. So, so there was an agenda involved that Magda appreciated, and Magda became part of that community. So these are Magda's words about this. I started to work with international groups to develop learning projects, learning materials and resources for different subjects. One of them was energy management. The other one was sustainability, diversity, and there was also other stuff. All this included multilingual approaches. We had the German government working on that, people from Italy, Spain. So we used English as a mixture and a mixture of other languages. So again, having a particular agenda, just that makes sense kind of to you as an individual, but has societal impact as well. The case of Choman was the Kurdish writer, and as I explained, she managed actually to write and publish a novel within 1.5 years upon arrival. So Choman's first book wasn't published by any publisher. She particularly worked with a community of Canadian writers of color and a publisher who was interested in giving voice to Canadian writers of color, but just supported that project. So the reality is, Choman's first published novel came out of her engagement with that community more than anything else. So when I'm talking about a kind of socially committed form of community writing, one major component is community writings that have an agenda and share an agenda. The second item next to just sharing an agenda with community is really a kind of further step of just attempting to establish a writing circle and writing community. So having an agenda which attracts you into the community is very important, but being a member of a writing circle or a writing community is very important as well. Clarice, for instance, just to remind you again, Clarice was the Brazilian academic writer who was a graduate student. So Clarice had created a community around herself at the university where she was studying, and these the members of this community were mainly international students, international graduate students, and they had created an academic circle which supported all the members in the process of publication and writing these articles. So part of that, part of the activities they did was just writing together. But I think my data shows that they engaged in a lot of exchange of information about navigating different academic journals. Showman again, particularly before arrival in Canada, engaged was a member of a literary circle that she referred to as the Gold Circle. So Sherman explained that without a membership in that community, that writing community, she wouldn't have become a writer. So the Gold Circle was an underground literary circle in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Choman was a Kurdish writer, but she moved to the capital to go to university to study literature. So Choman became part of this underground literary circle. Choman never managed to publish what she wrote in that circle because she wrote about women's issues, and because of the censorship, particularly the struggles of Kurdish women, and because of the censorship in the country, she never managed to publish. But Choman talked about that writing community as a kind of the foundation of her literary engagement and intellectual kind of development in different ways. So, so when we're talking about collaboration in writing, I think it's really important to imagine what kind of writing circles and communities our students are involved in, and how can we connect them with writing circles and communities. So part of these communities, or beyond these communities, relationships might take form that have a huge impact on the kind of on writing practices of our students. In the case of my participants, they specifically talk a lot about the organic mentors they had. Unfortunately, there were no references to a writing teacher in my data who appeared to play the role of these organic mentors. There were references to teachers who helped them get, for instance, a loan to continue their studies at university, or they supported them in different ways. But none of them really highlighted the impact of a writing teacher. In contrast, what they were really interested in talking about was the role of organic mentors and the impact they had on the writing practices. And these organic mentors, but not necessarily in the institutions where they studied. Choman, for instance, spoke about Sia, a guy who instructed some of the workshops in the Gold Circle, the writing community that I was talking about. So Sia played the role of an organic mentor whose presence really consolidated the identity of Choman as a writer. These are Choman's words about Sia. Sia, who ran some of the workshops, didn't like my first story. He didn't like the second story, but he loved the third one. When I was moving to Canada, he advised me not to quit writing. He said he saw a future for me as a writer, and his words mattered to me. So Magda, interestingly, talked about another influential kind of human in the process of kind of Magda turning into a technical writer and a textbooks writer, and that was her son. So Magda had a child very early in her life, and her son has started to grow and to go to school and to learn multiple languages. So a lot of Magda's writing when she was involved in different organizations in Europe actually happened in collaboration with her son, who was learning all these languages as well. So interestingly, so Magda's son played the role of that organic mentor, and as a teacher and as a person who tries to connect his research with teaching, when I get when I see findings like this, I ask myself, how often do we as writing teachers try to identify the organic mentors that our students might already be in conversation with and make them part of the process of teaching and learning writing? So we took one step further actually when thinking about the different communities that these students were actually involved with, and we decided to discuss the imagined communities that these participants felt they were part of. We felt that these organic connections with these participants have with these multiple communities matter a great deal. So perhaps the way they imagine themselves, or the way the memberships that these people imagine might play a role in the perceptions of who they are as writers and intellectuals and artists and academics as well. So take a few seconds and take a look at these people's imagined communities. So again, trying to connect the findings of this research to everyday practice, I cannot help but ask, okay, so successful writers imagine themselves as critical thinkers, as people who admire the arts and read kind of international literature, people who want to just interact with other people who genuinely want peaceful coexistence. People who, for instance, respect classical literature but want to be creative and innovative at the same time. People who like indie music. So when I look at this, I mean, I think I need to ask how is that connected to the process of teaching and learning writing? So is it a possibility that we can never actually teach our students writing if they don't imagine themselves as members of such communities? These people are not naive as the participants, as you see. They believe that they are critical thinkers, and they see themselves as curious about art and culture, but at the same time, they know that they're writing in English as an additional language. So Clarice says, I'm part of a community of second language writers. Choman says, I'm part of a community of writers with an accent. So the question for me again, as a person who wants to connect this with education, is what part of my pedagogy encourages my students to imagine themselves as members of such communities? Should my writing pedagogy include connections with discourses, communities, and texts that allows the students to negotiate their identities and facilitates the participation in these imagined communities? So if you look at collaboration as writing with the components that I listed, so you see that when you take a look at the writings of participants like that, or students like my participants, you see personal writing trajectories with clear pasts, and I think recognizable futures in that writing trajectory. So we happen to be teaching writing in industrialized systems in which we see the students for a few months and we say goodbye. We have no idea typically what they wrote before they came to our courses, particularly if they wrote in their own languages, and what they're going to do later on. I know that a lot of great teachers do their best to make sense of a student's past and students' futures, but I don't feel that our institutions really encourage that. So my research shows that if you have kind of such a broad view of who your students are and what communities they engage with, and if you try to have access to the writing across their life journeys, you're going to see personal writing, kind of visible personal writing trajectories. And these personal writing trajectories are recognizable across languages, cultures, and communities. In these writing trajectories, you see that discourses that they repeatedly engage with. You see political and social and cultural agendas that in which these people actually have invested their lives. And I think this is just to go back to the connection with chatbots. I think this is what chatbots cannot create for you at the moment, at least. So a recognition of the humans who have surrounded our students' writing can be a kind of can be a solution to a question about our worries and anxieties about chatbots. That requires, understandably, a focus, shifting our focus from the text and from the errors that the students make to who our students are and the communities they engage with and the desires and the plans for life. And I think that's not an easy shift, but I believe that effective teachers always try to make that connection. So I talk about the implications of the data that and the findings and the data that I presented for practice. Then I switch back to a conversation about chatbots to show probably what is missing in our pedagogy that has made us so concerned about the existence of AI and what AI can do with writing actually. So based on the data that I shared with you, I believe that writing classes should be treated as writing communities. And part and parcel of those writing communities is an exchange of discourses as well as writing skills. So as a writing teacher, I often ask myself, so what kind of discourses am I exposing my students to in this writing class? So this is not really the concern of a chatbot because the chatbot focuses on writing skills and tries to produce a well-written text. I cannot control that, at least with AI anymore, but I still can control exposure to discourses. And I think this is what we have ignored in a lot of our pedagogies. And I think that might be a really great kind of pedagogical source to tap into. Second, teachers should invite the students to develop meaningful agendas for the writing projects. So if instead of focusing on just creating a polished text, we invite the students to really think about a cultural agenda or a social agenda, a political agenda for which they want to produce texts, we kind of we switch our focus from the text itself to that agenda and the communities that in different ways share the same agenda. And I think that's probably what AI cannot do. Because what we're concerned about is really students using AI to produce the text that we're gonna grade, and I think they're most probably going to do that in different forms. AI companies are going to create technologies that will enable teachers to identify the people who have been using AI to produce their own texts as well. So that's not my concern. What I'm suggesting is, can we focus on those agendas rather than creating an error-free text? Third, writing classes should embrace students' organic mentors or faster out-of-school mentoring relationships. Again, that's why I was happy that we are now in the age of AI, because I can kind of argue for this more strongly, that that writing teachers, the reality is, cannot teach writing in the course of a semester or 2 semesters. Maybe a very effective kind of writing pedagogy is just inviting students to talk about their organic mentors, to bring them into classroom activities, classroom assignments, for instance, or if they don't have these organic mentors, talk about examples of that, and foster these relationships. It's not difficult to do, and some teachers are already doing that. For instance, inviting local artists and local writers and different people who engage with, like, for instance, musicians, people who write lyrics, to invite them to come into the classes. Maybe something will come out of it. As I have experienced myself, as my research shows, students already have those connections outside the schools as well. So why don't we move beyond essays literacies and just engage with assignments like, for instance, oral storytelling, to ask the students to talk about the people they know, and sometimes to construct a text with them, actually, so to collaboratively write with them. So connecting students with organic mentors, fostering those relationships, or bringing those organic mentors into the process of engaging with our assignments might be another strategy. The fourth kind of suggestion is thinking about activities in the classroom that can help students negotiate their imagined communities. It is really essential when we are teaching second language writers, and particularly when we are teaching in a country like Canada, which embraces a lot of newcomers. So our students cannot be successful writers in English in Canada, or in French for that matter, if they don't see themselves as members of imagined communities that already exist in Canada, or imagined communities that engage with discourses that make sense to Canadian people and Canadian educators. So how do we foster that in our everyday pedagogies? Part of that might be a part of all these processes that I spoke about might be taking publishing and dissemination as an essential component of teaching writing. There is a reason for that. If our students write in a community of writers, to publish, to share their writing with an authentic audience, they are already part of an intellectual community. They already go out to find the mentors who can help this happen. And they're already right for genuine kind of socio-political agendas. So bringing in publishing into the process of writing, I think it's a really great solution to kind of concerns about an authentic and an organic pedagogy. And in a way, this is again something that AI cannot do, or cannot do that for our local purposes, because we really, through project-based approaches in a particular writing community, we localize the process of writing and all its components. Finally, I understand that such approaches require the transformation of our our current text-oriented assessment to a post-rubric model, in which we don't just evaluate a student's writing for particular formalistic skills. What we evaluate is really our students' identity negotiation, and our students' kind of engagement with different discourses, and their membership in different discourse communities. that requires a different model of evaluation. Part of that evaluation might be self-evaluation of teachers, how probably in this kind of approach, we need to evaluate how much of that facilitation we do, and because the performance is really the facilitation of the process. If our students engage with a project-based approach, they have already passed our test. So I think the kind of the assessment strategies in such an approach would be completely different. So as you might imagine, the kind of the previous list of the implications for practice stand in contrast with what we have been doing in dominant writing pedagogy, which is a rhetoric of deproduction. Okay, so trying to show that we haven't produced anything, because in a rhetoric of deproduction, in contrast with what I explained, we invite the students or we ask the students to just paraphrase and reorder online text with no connection with discourse communities. I intentionally wrote online text because I feel that most of our our students' writing and reviews of literature, for instance, really come from online texts, and this is what AI can do much better than any of us. Again, in this form of rhetoric of the production, we reuse prescribed genres such as a 5-paragraph essay. So all these companies have been using our rubrics as writing teachers, and they've fed them into these machines. So they are reproducing those genres. Even in the poetry that they produce, they are just reusing particular genres. A lot of people have been surprised that AI can produce poetry because they don't know that the digital kind of poetry writing with automated texts or text making apps have been around for a long time. There is a huge kind of community of digital poets who have been producing accidental poetry for a long time. So this is nothing really new. So what they're doing is just reusing those genres. Again, in a rhetoric of the production, we ask the students to employ rhetorical gimmicks to project objectivity. So an AI can do that really effectively. As you might know, one of the problems with chatbots at the moment is the technicians and the engineers say that they hallucinate, meaning they confidently lie. And this is, I believe, that is something that we sometimes expect our students when we talk about voice, for instance, academic voice, that you have to assert your ideas, and that means gimmicks that helps them just share their ideas confidently, sometimes without any kind of evidence to back up what they're saying. And this is what AI can do very well. So another item is reporting to an abstract universal audience. So AI doesn't care who we are because we are an abstract universal audience. And in most cases, I think this is what essayist literacy does through a rhetoric of the production and through objectivity gimmicks. So if we have an agenda-based writing for a particular authentic audience in our local spaces, we cannot write for a universal audience. We are writing for an audience which is probably part of our community already or in the neighborhood of our community, and we write for them. And this is the text that we can produce only because we know them. They are in our locality, they are in our neighborhood. We want the students to follow standardized writing conventions. Again, any kind of computerized machine can do that better than any human. And eventually, we create texts individually as a task for a school grade. And again, the grades are provided based on prefabricated rubrics as well. And if we change that to an agenda-based approach and a community-based approach to writing, we might be able to create a different form of writing and pedagogy that cannot be reproduced by AI. So thank you everyone for listening to this presentation. This is the end of my presentation. I just finalize whatever I've said with a suggestion that let's move from a rhetoric of the production to a rhetoric of collective intellectual production for social impact. Thank you so much. I just stop sharing the slide and look forward to engage with questions and comments if there are any. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Kalan, so much for this this talk. I think I can confidently speak for others that was a really succinct and insightful, you know, not just summary of your research, but its impacts on our attitudes and our approaches to teaching. And I think it's so timely, especially this your comments about AI in general. And I find it completely fascinating. So I hope that some people will pose some questions. I'm sure people are just stewing over, thinking about it. Sometimes it takes a minute to articulate what you want to say. So we will wait for people to write into the chat.
And Brian, I think Isabella is going to try to unmute people so they'll be able to ask their questions out loud as well. I'm not sure where we are with the unmuting.
That would be great. Either way would work. So if you're able to type in, then I'll read it out, or if you're able to speak, then that would be even better. I'm wondering, like, one thing you mentioned was about getting a sense of the students' writing trajectory. And I know a lot of teachers, I know don't always want to go straight to this, but a lot of teachers want to know what's a tool I can use in my classroom, like right away. So do you imagine when you talk about getting a sense of the students' writing trajectory, do you think it would be what you're talking about, like using that as like a diagnostic activity, like on the first day of class, everybody writes a text about you know, their previous writing skills and what they hope to do with writing, and you know, would that be what you're enough, or is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think activities like that are always helpful. Just actually, in particularly in the US, in kind of writing composition courses at undergraduate level, they have a tradition of that kind of approach. So sometimes in the first few sessions, they invite the students to do a kind of autoethnography of their own literacy practices. In the example you gave, that's kind of more specific to a kind of diagnostic approach, and definitely, I think just asking students to share some writing with the teacher about and write a little bit about what forms of writing they have engaged in previously. So next to activities like this, so we have been, I know Professor Galante has been here as well, and I'm pretty sure she has spoken about prolingualism. So a lot of conversations about prolingualism or prolingual approaches to writing and translanguaging actually allow the students to bring in their own languages. And with that, I think typically what you get is you get to know a little bit more about the kinds of writing that these students did in their own languages before they started to write in English. Again, there is a huge conversation about in kind of writing studies about intercultural rhetoric. So I'm sure if you're teaching second language writing, you need to develop strategies to engage with, to really make sense of the rhetorical background of the students in their own mother tongues. So part of that might be inviting the students to bring examples of the literature of the language that they know. All of these activities, all these textbook activities, I think, all these text-oriented activities can be very helpful. Brown, at the same time, I believe that a lot of that happens in a kind of, in an organic relationship between teachers and students. I think it's very important that teachers actually get to know the students. I believe, again, talking about alternative pedagogies that may not focus on the text itself, I believe if you're teaching a writing class, you need to be able to say who is a poet in your class, or who has written plays, or who writes songs. So how is it possible to teach writing to a group of people who are already writing poetry and plays and other forms of text, but you don't have a strategy to identify that? So a lot of that, I think, happens through the relationship that you develop. And just to summarize that, I mean, you can always simply ask that, okay, what are some of the texts that you wrote before? So in what I did, I taught writing composition in my previous job at University of Dayton. So I created this online space, and I invited everyone to share the writing they did before they came to this class. And just to make that text visible was really, really helpful and taught me a lot as a teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Oh,
I'm going to read a couple of questions that are coming up. So
sure.
the first one is from Vincent, and they say human writers can code mesh, write multilingual texts, or perform translanguaging that connect them with writing communities. Is that an area that could be pedagogically explored to restore a sense of social communities in writing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. I briefly spoke about that kind of the connection to the trajectory. But I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that translanguaging allows all those connections. Probably like me, you have some or probably a lot of prolingual friends on your social media platforms, and you see that they just post the stuff in different languages, and a lot of that were never visible to me before I just followed them on social media, because when we met, probably we spoke in the dominant language. So that's the same thing happens with translanguaging. I think it creates this possibility to connect with different communities. There are a lot of Canadian teachers who engage with projects like identity texts or me mapping projects. And in these projects, you usually allow students to use multiple languages. Actually, you encourage them to use multiple languages because they want to kind of reveal different aspects of their identities. And part and parcel of a lot of these projects, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, is including the students' families in these processes. So you're already inviting the students' families in the process and students' friends. So definitely, I think translanguaging is a huge kind of advantage when it comes to thinking about the communities that these people can connect with. Yeah.
Okay, and there are a couple of other questions which I think really speak to one of the tensions that a lot of teachers feel between some of the theories that they maybe learn about in school or hear about or read about versus the institutional constraints that they have, or maybe even the internalized expectations of students to receive a certain kind of pedagogy that they expect to get. So I'll read the questions, but I'm just going to switch the order a little bit because Louise has asked what do you mean by developing a meaning agenda with your students? And the other two questions are also related to agenda-based writing. So maybe first we can back up a little bit and just define what you mean by an agenda-based writing or meaning agenda with your students.
Yeah, so the agenda-based writing is instead of regarding ourselves as experts of a technique, the technique of writing, or the technique of, or the structure of a genre, instead of kind of considering our task as teachers as teaching students how to write, an agenda-based approach kind of regards the job of teaching writing as creating a collective agenda for the students about which everybody writes and everybody collaborates, hopefully in the form of a publication. So I call it a meaningful kind of agenda because a meaning-oriented approach, because in this approach, your focus is not really the writing skills. The focus is on a meaningful agenda that people are genuinely invested in. What happens typically in these projects is you invite everybody to contribute a piece, you collect what the students have written, and you publish it in some form. It might be the form of an online publication, but it might be print-based publication. You distribute it in some form. You might just put it on Amazon for anyone in the world to buy the book, but you might share it with the next class. But in this form of writing, I think our concerns, I mean, we stop our obsession with the kind of the text and the formalistic aspects of the text. So we pay attention to other aspects. We ask who our students are. We ask and what they are interested in, what they want to write about. And we ask what is happening around us and what are the social discourses around us and how we can respond to those social discourses. So I give you an example to better illustrate this, because I think that these are good questions. So at University of Dayton, where I taught writing composition courses, writing composition courses are seriously disliked in the US context because they're mandatory and everybody has to take them. So you go to university to do engineering or do you want to do chemistry, but you have to write in two or less or kind of more courses. You have to just take these courses and just write essays over and over again. So students are not very much kind of attracted to these courses. And I felt that kind of that negative attitude towards the course that I was teaching. So what I did instead was I said, okay, so we are supposed to create these texts, but let's make it a little bit more meaningful for us. So my students were all STEM students. They were in medical school, they were doing engineering and business, even management. I said, okay, so let's define a project. All our writing is going to be, of course, this is what we decided as a community, that all our writing is going to be about the ethical dimensions of your disciplines. So if you are an engineer, you can write about education in engineering or the situation of women in the field of engineering. If you are in medical school, you can write about kind of the ethics involved in medicine. If you are doing business, you can write about what it means to be a kind of ethical bank manager or something. So everybody loved the idea, and actually they encouraged me to move towards that direction. And we just wrote about the same kind of central theme, and we decided to publish all these kind of literature reviews. A lot of that writing was in the form of literature review, actually. online. And last time actually I checked that was in my writing course last week, and almost, I mean, 15,000 articles based on that particular project have been downloaded. So what I'm suggesting, I mean, the philosophical aspects of that and the philosophical foundation of my suggestion might feel a little bit far-fetched, but I think in practice, all you have to do is really just tweak what you're doing already in the classroom to bring some meaning to it. And that's what I mean by meaningful kind of agenda, or a meaning-based approach to writing. Something that has some meaning for the students and for an audience, an authentic audience, beyond the kind of our obsession with formalistic aspects of writing. I hope I was clear enough. Yeah.
Yes, I understand, and I understand why we go beyond just error-free writing. And your last point about um, a post-rubric model, then to judge what successful writing is. Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I think that was a great answer, and I will read the next questions, even if you touched on it a little bit. There's still this, I think, as Louise mentioned, something else you brought up, which is the post-rubric, which I love this this idea. And you know, if programs are being developed and courses are being designed from the ground up, a lot of times the advice is you have to start with these well-defined outcomes, which are measurable and can be assessed. And so one of the other questions here is, how can agenda-based writing be assessed, and how can one develop critical thinking skills to effectively analyze such writing? And the same person continues, how can agenda-based writing align with or conflict with institutional policies? And what strategies can be employed to ensure that agenda-based writing is consistent with organizational values and goals?
Yeah, these are difficult questions. I'll just do my best. So because I'm saying these are difficult questions, because in a way, what I'm suggesting is really kind of challenging institutional norms. However, I don't believe that it's always really a form. It's always a form of conflict. I think it's a lot of that is the way we interpret institutional requirements. So what I'm suggesting is not really just throwing away all rubrics. I think rubrics are actually very helpful. But I think rubrics are helpful as long as they help our students to develop the text. Most often, unfortunately, we use rubrics to punish students, and I don't believe that's a very good strategy. So if rubrics can help our students, I think we should use them and use them for that purpose. What I usually find with institutions is if we happen to meet the requirements, I think they're usually fine with whatever we add to that. So in the examples that I spoke about, so I was required to invite the students to write different forms of essays, for instance, and we still did that. We wrote, but we tweaked the purpose a little bit. So by making that text public, they were not only writing for me anymore, I mean, but to just get a grade. They felt that they were working, they were contributing to social discourses in different ways. How do we assess that? Still, I required them to follow some certain formalistic elements, and we had conversations about those. At the same time, part of the performance was more than those linguistic elements. Part of the performance was actually getting that collection of articles published. So if we can publish that together, everybody has an A plus, because we have achieved that goal. So I think if you show up as a member of this writing community, if you support your peers, you get an A+ because you have met an additional requirement next to the linguistic aspect. So that's why, again, I find project-based approaches so helpful, because when we share something with the world, when we produce a project together, we have just achieved achieved the goal that we had in mind. So the community has an A+ from my point of view. It doesn't mean that we should deny all the kind of institutional requirements. I think we need to tweak them to make them a little bit more meaningful. I don't believe that institutions will necessarily punish instructors because they have added that layer. My experience actually has been quite the opposite. And the institutions have really loved to see what I did. For instance, in the case of University of Dayton, they helped us create an online kind of venue to publish these articles. So the reaction has been usually the opposite. So so let's look at it as a kind of as an addition to what we are doing. The challenge is it might at times take more work for us as instructors. So we have to decide if we want to engage in it, and in what form and how often. So so I was a pragmatic teacher as well, so I knew that I couldn't do that every day of every course. So I created a project that I could gradually manage over a semester, and I had enough time to deal with that. So so I don't believe it's impossible, but I agree that it's a challenge. I think the more we do this as instructors and create communities of instructors who share the same kind of mentality, it will become easier for all of us. And by the way, I think sorry, Brian, but and now we have AI, we have chatbots. We can go to the institution and say, what you want me to teach, chatbots are already doing. I have to do something else. That's why I find kind of chatbots so kind of convenient for me, because now I can actually talk about the research that I've done and just more effectively communicate its significance. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have to say that that's such a breath of fresh air to hear somebody with a positive take on this, because I'm sensing so much anxiety from some teachers about, you know, how are we going to deal with this. And so thank you for sharing this. I think a lot of people can draw from this, and I know that I'll be having conversations with teachers in the near future about on the topic of AI and ChatGPT, and you've given me some resources for sure, some mental resources for how to approach this. So I think that's great. If you could say a little bit more about the things that you've helped, how you've helped your students publish online. I don't know, you mentioned that Dayton helps you. Do you know of things maybe at DICE where there's something? I know there's the Build blog, but what are some other online or easily accessible routes to publication?
Yeah, I think there are really multiple kind of ways we can do that. I think institutions sometimes facilitate this. I was lucky because University of Dayton was very interested in that online journal we created. I have done that in other places as well. Sometimes you don't need an institution to facilitate this. In another project, I was teaching a group of women's rights activists actually in Tehran, and I connected this group with a community of hip hop artists, because I was in conversation with them. So these two communities wrote together and we published a book, and we released just the PDF online. But what was interesting about the dissemination of that book, and that book was downloaded more than 50,000 times actually. So what was interesting was because these hip hop artists were part of this, and the women were part of this. They had their own social media. Some of them were well known. So so just it was like just spread like fire actually, and everybody has started to download those. So we just simply had a PDF at that point. In other projects, I have used Amazon, for instance. It's very easy to self-publish these days. The great thing about Amazon is actually you can print versions of that for you as a person who has the Amazon page, and you can give an actual book to your students. So there are really different ways of doing that. I think at Dice, Build is definitely a great resource. Currently, I am developing a research center. It's called Mosaic in French, a research center for studies in literacy, discourse, and society. Part of this research center is going to be a community publishing project. So hopefully we can offer support to any teachers who are in this space and they want to publish something they create with their students exactly for that purpose. Because I believe community publishing is a very powerful pedagogical tool, and at the same time, I think it has really enormous societal impact. So there are really different sources of kind of different possibilities for dissemination. If anyone here is interested in disseminating the work, I'm always happy to have a conversation with you. The more we know about the nature of the project, I think the easier it becomes to decide about the dissemination process. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point that the agenda would, you know, help to define how you want it to be published, certainly, and that knowing about those communities, those writing communities, would also give direction to where this might be published.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that all that you're talking about is us also speaking to how universities or other institutions can have more of a connection with people outside of the institution who are doing education, who are developing alternative discourses to what is allowed to be said in the institution, and that there's a real opportunity for us to work with our students to make more of a much better connection rather than the university being cordoned off from those communities, and the types of discourses and the ways of thinking being excluded from the institution, or being framed as illegible or as illiterate, or as not formal enough for the institution. So I think it's so relevant to the moment that we're in, as a lot of the university as a whole is rethinking a lot of things and trying to take on new approaches, and I think it's a great opportunity to try and shift as much as we can this some of the philosophical groundings that make it so that we're always teaching students to become machines and reproduce, as you said, these formulaic and repetitive and not very creative forms of writing. So,
Absolutely.
If Brian,
please,
if I could comment briefly
please.
on that. I was playing with ChatGPT the other day, and sort of in line with what you're saying, Dr. Khan, I picked one of the most restricted forms I could think of, which was a limerick. So I just picked randomly, I asked it to write a limerick about Meghan Markle. And when you were talking about that AI will lie, it made up a word. It made up a word, carkle. So the limerick was very bad. I mean, it was about Meghan Markle. It was a very bad limerick, but it did conform perfectly to the format, and it made up this word carkle. So I asked it, what Carkle meant. So I challenged it a little bit, like, what does Carkle mean? And it actually apologized to me and explained to me that it had made up the word in order to be able to adhere to this very strict formulaic form of writing. So I found that really quite interesting, and it kind of pointed out to me, you know, the complete ridiculousness of trying to squish any meaning into a form that doesn't suit the meaning, really. Absolutely.
I think, and that this is what actually, I'm not an AI expert, but I've been following a lot of conversations about AI and particularly text creation because of my research, and that's what the technicians are actually scared about. The people, the engineers who have created AI, they say it just confidently lies, and it's really our pedagogy. It's again in critical literacy, there has been a conversation in literature about kind of assertion, a rhetoric of assertion. So in essay writing, we just teach our students to assert their opinions and be opinionated. And so we hardly teach them to doubt themselves, so talk about different possibilities. So, and to question their own positionality. And this is, I mean, this is what we've got. I mean, AI is really part of that. Yeah. And it's only, sorry if I can continue, it's only the beginning. I mean, the way they describe it. So AI is going to get better and better. So it's really a brain somehow, a kind of digital brain. So it's going to get better and better, and I think it's going to produce really better quality text. I hope that it gets so good that teachers will consider errors as quality writing, because now we have a student who is actually sharing their own writing, they're really trying. So we value errors rather than punishing the students for errors. And this is what has already happened in media. So we created this highly kind of technological spaces where mainstream news was produced, and all this technology and good lighting and perfect picture and everything actually alienated the people, because people believe that mainstream media is not telling the truth. So what happened gradually, we preferred something that somebody just recorded on a mobile phone or something with less quality, and we considered that kind of actual data and actual information. I hope the same thing would happen with writing, particularly when it comes to second language writing, because we know that second language writers like me, we might always just make mistakes. And probably we should just accept that. Yeah.
Thank you again. Yeah, I completely appreciate, and I agree, completely appreciate everything that you've said here. And so thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up here. And I hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation about these topics. And I'm sure this is, we're going to see how this develops with the AI. And but apart from that, your words about collaborative writing and the importance of community and the importance of meaningful agendas that are student-centered rather than teacher and curriculum-centered, I think is so timely and important for us as teachers here. So thank you again, and thank you for everybody who attended.
Thank you, Dr. Kalan. Thank you very much for spending your Friday afternoon with us.
Thank you all. It was wonderful to be in conversation with this community. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yes.